All right, well, welcome everybody to this Introduction to Kriya Yoga course, this stay-at-home Kriya Yoga retreat webinar. We're going to be spending quite a lot of time together, and as I was saying before we started the recording, looks like we've got people from all over the world, some folks from India, Costa Rica, even some northern countries over there in Europe. So I don't know what time it is there for you, but hopefully you'll be able to attend as many of the sessions as possible, depending on your time. But again, as I mentioned, these sessions will be recorded. So even if you can't stay up late to participate, you will be getting the sessions. So you can still listen to them. Now, when we first decided to participate in this together, I sent around a document about ways to prepare for our time together. And it's really just common sense stuff, things to keep you internalized and focused throughout the duration of this retreat. And so I'd like to encourage you to definitely follow that. You know, basically eat a very simple diet. Don't over stress your system with heavy foods. Since we are participating in a 4-day period, take more time for rest and relaxation, go for strolls. You want to do a little bit of light exercise, whether it be Qigong or going for walks or even a little bit of light yoga, just to keep your body moving. But you don't want to do anything to over tire yourself out. Also, you want to have permission to get more rest. And that's really the point of a retreat. When I first got involved in meditation, I would go on retreats. And I would always find that I would sleep quite a bit more on those retreats. And that's because, you know, my daily life didn't necessarily always make room for that. So when I had nothing else to do, it allowed my body to take time to reset itself. So you might find that that occurs. You don't want to think that that's a problem. You don't want to fight it. You know, you're on retreat. So if you need to take a nap, take a nap. And then once you're well rested, once you're feeling energized, we're going to be going over some meditation techniques. So you want to experiment with them, because we have to remember that this is ultimately a learning experience for you. That it's good to meditate daily. It's good to go on retreats occasionally. It's good to take time away from the world occasionally. But the whole point of it is to get you more fully centered in your normal everyday life. Meaning that we don't want you to just occasionally attend to meditation, or occasionally take some time for resting, or occasionally take some time for light exercise. We want to see you incorporating these things into your daily life. That way your whole life eventually, hopefully, ideally, can become less stressful. Because really, the less stress we have in our life, generally speaking, the easier it is for us to understand what it means to practice yoga, to understand what it means to be internalized and peaceful, to understand and figure out what everyone's talking about when they mention things like enlightenment. And you also find that meditation becomes much easier the more well-rested you are and the more relaxed you are. You know, certain meditation experiences don't really present themselves until the individual is calm and able to stay awake, so attentive, but also remaining relaxed. And if you've read some of my books or listened to some of my audios or videos, you want to really cultivate that idea of attention with relaxation. And the metaphor or idea I typically use, it's as if you are maybe out in nature and you happen to come upon a beautiful flower, or you see a beautiful sunrise or sunset, or you happen to see just a stunning view of a forest. In that instant, you are perfectly awake. You're present. You see it. It's right there in front of you. You are relaxed. You are observing. And so it's that kind of state where we want to be alert, yet relaxed, that if we can learn to try to train ourselves to exist in that manner, it makes it much easier for us to appreciate what spiritually minded people are talking about when they discuss various meditation experiences. So that's really the goal that we're trying to shoot for with this retreat, is to give you skills to learn how to meditate well, to give you insights, to help you live your life such that you're able to make the most of this. And to give you an example, of how do you put together a life or a lifestyle that makes all this possible. So we have to be clear that as we explore this, that when we're thinking about Kriya Yoga, when we're thinking about spirituality, when we're thinking about our ideals of religious experience, whatever it might be, that we are realizing that it's not just simply reading books that some people call spiritual. It's not simply about reciting a mantra or focusing on the breath once or twice a day. It's not simply about not eating onions and garlic. That it's really helping you to figure out personally, what do you need to do in order to exist and participate in the world in an alert, attentive, engaged, yet relaxed state. Because it's only when you can experience that and cultivate that you will really truly get the full benefit of the meditation techniques and full benefit of the practices. And this is going to be true for any kind of spirituality. You know, over the years, it's probably been about 3 or 4 years now, I've had a little bit harder and harder time defining this work specifically as Kriya Yoga. I mean, I know why we have to do that, because it is part of a particular tradition. But the more you practice and the more you pay attention, the more you realize that most intentional, authentic, religious and spiritual practices are all really encouraging the same thing. If you strip away all the dogma, if you strip away all the superstition, if you strip away all the fantasy around the saviors and the gurus, and you just take a moment to look at what is the teaching all about, what is the intention behind it, and ultimately, what is it pointing to as a final type of experience, you'll see that really it's all the same thing. So I want you to keep that in mind, that as we move forward, this current era, this current time period we're in, we're not really able to, or at least I hope not, to force ourselves to identify with a particular tradition or idea or category. That we need to start seeing the world and the people around us and the practices that we have as just simply methods and procedures that are part of our own development as a unique, individualized aspect of this infinite consciousness. Now, it's not separate, it's the same thing, but we are an expression of a greater whole. And that we may respond to certain ideas, philosophies, and techniques that another individual might not. In the same way that when it comes to plants and flowers, and if you're trying to grow a garden, you know, some plants need certain soil, some plants need to be tied up and bound so that they grow correctly. Some of them will do everything on their own. Some of them need hardly any fertilizer. Others will do well if you fertilize them well. Some you have to go out and pick little worms off of, and others, they just take care of themselves. And so we're all, in a sense, like these plants. And spiritually speaking, what we choose for our own development is just a particular kind of nourishment we need to exist as an expression of this infinite consciousness, just like the plants themselves are an expression of the sunlight that shines upon them, the earth from which they grow from, the breeze that blows between their leaves. We are that same, we function in that same fashion. So first and foremost, as we proceed through this, yes, the tradition that I learned pretty much everything from is the Kriya Yoga tradition. I also have a deep interest in vichara, or self-inquiry, which is often related to Ramana Maharshi, which again is why the topic of the latest book is Kriya Yoga Vichara, because they both seamlessly flow together. But at the end of the day, it's all just dependent upon what do you need as an individual to exist clearly and to allow life, this wholeness of life, to express as your very self. whether you call it Kriya, whether you call it Vichara, whether you call it transcendental meditation, whether you call it being a Sikh, or whether you call it whatever it might be, religious, spiritual, otherwise, it's all going to be really aiming towards the same direction, at least in my mind, my experience. So there's one question that pops up immediately, which is a great lead-in to the idea of Kriya itself. Stephanie asks, what does Kriya mean? Well, Kriya, my understanding is that it's a term sharing the same root as the word karma, and that Kriya means action. Just like when we think of karma, being an astrologer, I oftentimes look at people's charts, and in a sense, we're looking at their karma. That's the fruits that they're going to experience. So that's a type of action. And the idea of Kriya, it's any kind of activity that allows you to, again, calm down the nervous system, turn your attention within, and experience reality directly. That's exactly what Kriya does. And since it's, in a sense, a generic term, Kriya, action, well, ultimately, to tie it back into our previous discussion, any action which allows you to experience reality as it is considered a Kriya and can be considered a part of Kriya Yoga. Most of you who've read Autobiography of a Yogi, or who may have studied some of my other works, or even other Kriya Yoga teachers, you know that there is a strong focus on particular meditation techniques. Essentially, the idea of circulating life force through the spine. That is a Kriya. It's considered a cleansing Kriya to the energetic aspect of the body. But we have to also bear in mind that, for example, every day I use a neti pot filled with salt water, and I clean out my nostrils, which is called neti Kriya. It's supposed to keep you healthy, but it's also said to keep the spiritual eye clear so that you can see clearly in your meditation practices. But that's called a neti Kriya. And so that is an action that, again, helps to cleanse, keep your body healthy, keep your energetic system healthy, so that ideally you can perceive the world, you can perceive life as it is as clearly as possible. So Kriya, simply, it means action. And any activity that we do that is dedicated towards clarity and wisdom can be considered, in a sense, Kriya Yoga. Now, what's the basic philosophy of this whole idea, this whole practice? Well, the basic philosophy essentially is that everyone and everything is a facet or an aspect of this holistic one consciousness. In the same way that when you look at a diamond or a ruby or an emerald that's been cut, you can see the facets, the flat sides of the stone that let light in and reflect light out. Those facets are not separate from the stone itself. They're just a different aspect of the stone. So in the same way, the basic philosophy is that everything that we can see, experience, touch, feel, taste, even in our dreams, even in our thoughts, is a facet of this one holistic consciousness. And to continue on with the idea of the name Kriya Yoga, well, yoga itself, that means to bring together, to unite things. And oftentimes people will take that to mean that Kriya Yoga is going to unite you with God, unite you with the concept of the divine. And in a sense, you can look at it that way. But since you're participating in this particular session with me, I'm going to speak to you as directly as possible. I'm not going to use a lot of, hopefully, ideally, use a lot of religious terminology because I think things are a bit simpler than that. And the reason I say this is because the idea of yoga, we use that concept because our minds have a sense that I am here, you are there, or I am here, and this idea of God, divine consciousness, peace, love, enlightenment, whatever it is somewhere else. That's an idea. It's a concept. It's separative. And as you go through and you practice meditation techniques, as you study the texts that are advised, such as the Yoga Sutras or the Bhagavad Gita, eventually what that does is it starts to not really bring you together with the thing that you think you're separated from. All it really does is it removes the false idea that you are separate. Okay, so we have to think about this in the sense that the idea of the term Kriya Yoga, it's actions that unite us, that allow us to see that we are part of this one whole infinite consciousness. But the real thing that's actually happening there is not that there's no you coming together with God. It's that you are essentially just realizing that you've always been one with, a part of, connected to this larger, more expansive consciousness beyond the little human awareness. So really, we're just curing, in a sense, or attending to the lack of awareness about what is true. And why do these things occur? Why do these things occur? Because think about it. Most of us have a blind identification with our body, our mind, our friends, our family, our concepts, our religions. We have an identification with them because they make us feel safe in a way. And as we go through the world, defining ourselves as I am this person, this is my body, I believe this, I'm with this other individual, that doesn't allow us to perceive and accept and appreciate the wholeness of life, because it's all, in a sense, fragmenting one's awareness. So what we find here is that, again, the whole process is really about growing up to the truth of the actual situation. And some people took issue with my idea in the most recent book where I was comparing outgrowing the idea of Santa Claus. So those of you who are familiar with that idea, well, during Christmas, supposedly this fella with a big white beard brings toys to all the little boys and girls who've been good. And that's a Christmas tradition that a lot of people celebrate in the West, maybe elsewhere too, I'm sure. But eventually you kind of grow up and you realize that, well, Santa Claus is just an idea, and that we're not really getting those presents, if we get them at all, from this mythical individual. And in the same way, these ideas that we have as we come into spirituality, they are only because we haven't quite matured yet to see the bare bones truth of it all. And this is what we are doing. We are undertaking a practice to grow to maturity, to let go of our fantasies, to release our need to define and separate ourselves from I'm here, you're over there, or this is good or this is bad. We are learning to let go of our tribalism between cultures and even dogmatic religions. And we're learning to find a way to be at peace within ourselves without having to defend ourselves, without having to confront others, and to realize that everything is representation, an aspect of this one whole consciousness. Now, we'll take it a little bit further, because it's easy to see how we can be divisional with people and their ideas. But what if we also consider the fact that we are divisive within how we attend to and perceive the world, in that when we're happy and things are going well, that therefore God is happy with us, or we've done something right and deserving of these good things. But when something goes wrong and there's sadness and there's grief, then obviously we're separate from the grace of God, of divine consciousness. And what makes this whole process so hard, and this is why I'm telling you right now, because we're at the beginning and I want you to know what you're getting into. What makes this process so hard is that it essentially confronts our very ideas about how life is supposed to be, and it takes us more into the natural state of life. Consider the idea that death occurs to everyone and everything, yet when someone gets sick or gets hurt or injured, automatically many people decide that, well, you just need the grace of God. We need to pray for you. Well, what if that's just life happening? What if that's just the natural state of things? That sometimes good things occur, sometimes bad things occur. It doesn't mean we don't try to cultivate a healthy life. It doesn't mean we don't try to avoid difficulty. It doesn't mean we act like an idiot and just think that everything's going to be what it is. But there are certain situations where it's just life naturally happening. And as humans, we can be divisive in this way too, by thinking that when we're sad, when we're upset about something, when we have grief, when we're depressed, when we act in a way that we consider not to be holy or whatever it might be, that therefore we are separate from divine consciousness. But what I'm going to encourage you to do is, as you attend to the positive aspects of your life, that you learn to, or try to figure out a way to see every aspect of yourself as an expression of God or divine consciousness, or whatever, what's the word? Whatever idea you may have about what it means to be enlightened, or whatever idea you might have about what a spiritual being or entity or thing is, to start to see everything as a representation of this one infinite consciousness. Because remember, if there is only one thing and everything else is an expression of it, that means when you feel sad, that's also an expression of it. And by learning to honor both the good, what you consider to be good, and the difficult and the hard as an aspect of yourself, an aspect of this one infinite consciousness, you are ceasing to create division within yourself. And you're simply seeing life as life is. So be aware that if you are coming to this path because you have problems and you want to escape from them, you're probably not going to stay long on this path. You will find that if you follow some of the recommendations, things will generally go better for you. But if you're looking for a blissful state, a heavenly realm, a state where absolutely nothing is ever going to go wrong, you're going to be let down. And you're going to be let down no matter which path you choose. So you might as well pick one and stick with it and learn to deal with it. But what you'll find is the more you can do this, what happens? Well, what you learn to develop then is unconditional love. And again, this is why this path is so hard, because how easy is that? No longer are you going to say to your idea of God or your concept of God or divine consciousness or the goddess or whatever it might be, I love you when you show up in this beautiful way. I love you when you give me everything I want. I love you when I can see the joy in the world. But then the moment I start to see your dark side, no, I don't love you anymore. You're going to be able to say, I love all aspects of you. I love everything, the rise and fall, the ebb and the flow that is natural part of your manifestation, which is also a natural part of myself. And then what occurs is, hopefully, ideally, you are then able to do this with the world around you. You lose your judgment of others. You don't say, I'm going to be your friend, or I'm going to appreciate you only when we do good and fun things together. You're going to say, I know life is difficult. When things get rough, I'll still have that sense of appreciation for you. And that develops this idea, this feeling, this truth of unconditional love, which is essential to being able to stay on this path long term. Which brings us to our next idea of timing. You've heard me say a few times, this is not an easy path. And it's not hard. I mean, you don't have to, go out and try to lift 1,000 pounds every day. It's not like that. It's just that you have to be very consistent with it, which is not very easy a lot for humans in general. But the process itself is a long-term process. Are you going to have an awakening experience in a couple months from practicing? Is your Kundalini going to explode out through your crown chakra after 2 years of practicing? If it does, well, reevaluate your practice. Because what I have found is, realistically speaking, is that if an individual is searching for that moment where everything just takes a 90-degree turn and works out well, or that moment where you are awakened beyond all imagining and there's no going back. But that is just a, how would I put it? Not subjugated, sublimated, maybe a sublimated way of just taking your religious things that you've been raised with, such as life after death, going to heaven, or in a few incarnations, then you'll be enlightened. You're just creating another mental concept that at some point in time, there's going to be a radical shift, and then you're not going to have to do anything ever again, right? There's this hope that humans have. But the truth of the matter, having participated in meditation, having explored this process since August 17th of 2000, what I have found is that it is incremental, that your understanding, your clarity, your inner peace accrues over time. Meaning that most definitely, when I had been practicing meditation every day for 2 years, if you would compare that person to the individual 3 years previously, my presentation, my presence was radically different. Okay? So then if you take that after practicing for 2 years and you go up to 5 years, again, there was a significant change. But between 2 years and 5 years, on the daily basis, the experience was really just like as you grow older and you look in the mirror every day, every morning, you don't really notice that you're getting a little more gray or that you have a couple more wrinkles. But if you look at a picture and you look in the mirror now and you look at a picture from 5 years ago, you see the difference. So what I want to encourage you to do is you need to think about attending to this process long term. Even after practicing for, what's it been, 16 years now, a little more than 16 years. My experience with it is exactly the same as my experience has been with exploring astrology. The deeper you go into it, the deeper you realize it is. And the more you focus and explore, the more awesome everything seems to be. And it's my hunch that eventually there will come a point where you realize that you cannot perceive it all through this little mind body. You have to learn to simply be who you are, to appreciate the wholeness as you experience it, and let that be enough. And once that's enough, then you're extremely close to the idea that a lot of people have of what you might consider to be a final realization. So you got to think about it long term. Having done this for 16 years, there's probably maybe 5 people I can think of that I have known over the course of this time period. Of the people who have come to my classes, of the people who've emailed me, of the people I've met on retreats, there are probably 5 people I can think of right now who have actually stayed steady and committed to the process in that 16-year period. The rest of the individuals, what do you do? Well, this sounds interesting. You get involved in it, but then your attention wanes and you either move back into your normal life as you have been, or you meet another person that promises a quicker way, or you see someone talking about fantastic things, which is more entertaining for you, and you go that direction. I see it happen. I've seen it happen all the time. And earlier on, I was really frustrated by that because I couldn't understand the whole process. But the more you pay attention, the more you notice human nature, you realize that it is extremely hard to focus on simple things that work. That what we as humans want are great promises. What we want are life-changing aha moments. That the slow and steady is not, it's not as entertaining. And the other difficulty is that you have to be self-motivated. All right. This will take us into another idea, all these things I wanted to cover. So I'm glad we're moving in this progression. You have to be self-motivated because, again, of these 5 individuals that I can think of that I've stayed in touch with and that I've observed who are and have stayed consistent with their practice, there's one thing in common with them. They are not giving their responsibility away to anyone else. They don't think that by going and sitting with someone who they consider to be awake or clear, that they are going to be awakened. They realize that just like anything in life, that if you want to experience something, you have to do the work to experience it. So always remember that when it comes to these practices, some people misinterpret my work and the things I say as to be anti-guru. I'm anti the idea of the Savior. I am not anti the idea of the person who might have more experience than you, that can train you and give you skills, or teach you skills, I should say, and guidance, which will allow you to do your own work. So when it comes down to it, those individuals who've had the clearest, most consistent progress along this path, they are respectful of the individuals who they can learn from. They don't expect anyone, a teacher or otherwise, to do the work for them. And they stick with it day in and day out. So I would like to encourage you to be very clear on this matter, that if you are really, truly serious about learning to experience inner peace, if you are truly serious about learning to be able to appreciate the wholeness of life as yourself and everything that exists, if you are seriously interested in outgrowing any fantasies you might have, to really get to the heart of the matter, what is actually true, which will be beyond the mind, which will be beyond your concepts, that it's going to require that you are the one that does the work. You know, when I first began this whole process, I was really just barely finishing college. I did finish college about a year early, so I finished in 3 years rather than 4. So I was a little younger. But when I became aware of this process, even though I wasn't living the most conscious life in the sense, I mean, I was always interested in philosophy. I was always interested in alternative spirituality. I was always interested in kind of trying to get to the bottom of things. But, you know, I was interested in music. I would go to parties with my friends. We'd play games a lot together. There wasn't a real serious thing there. I did have a lot of books on philosophy, as I mentioned, and I did think about things a lot. But once I discovered the process of meditation and the traditions that embody the idea of Kriya Yoga and Eastern spirituality, there was no question in my mind about doing it. And I didn't say, well, maybe. And I didn't say, gee, I hope someone can do this for me. I immediately started trying to meditate every day. I didn't do it very well at all, but I immediately started trying. I made myself uncomfortable. I gave myself backaches, but it seemed important. As you have read in the Kriya Yoga Vichara book, I even started sleeping in a different room than my wife, because it was much easier for me to wake up in the morning and go meditate for an hour. And of course, that was a little difficult being young and trying to explain why that was important, but it worked out. And so I forced myself to do that. I sought out a teacher who had more experience than me, quite a bit more experience than me, because say at the time he was 59, I think. Was he 59 or 69? So 59, I think it was 69. So he was 69 at the time. So he had quite a bit more experience than me. Actually, let me just figure that out. So if he is 85 minus 16, yes, he was 69. So he was 69 when I met him. And what was I, 19, 20? So I went to trainings, I went to retreats to figure out what needed to be done. And I didn't go because I thought to myself, here is a holy person that I have to be around. Now, at the time, being younger, a little bit of me wanted to believe that. So I can't get around that. But the idea of worship was never an issue for me towards my teacher. And I just listened to what he said, and I started applying it. And I would visit these retreats once a year, and then eventually I would go down 3 times a year to visit. But it was always the same thing. I mean, what I learned in the first retreat, every retreat I went after that, I just heard the exact same thing. Basic, simple stuff. And in time, it became so natural for me that I never had to force myself again to meditate or to do some hatha yoga when necessary, or to study spiritual texts to keep my mind focused and clear. It just became natural. Even when I would get sick, even when I would be busy, it was just as natural as breathing, just as natural as taking a shower. So what we're going to find is that you are in charge of your own process. If you learn something from another individual, that's wonderful, but you have to actually apply it for it to become real for you. Our goal together is not to engender any kind of teacher worship or even tradition worship, because we want you to be very practical about your approach. It's again self-responsibility and doing the work, the simple everyday things that we'll cover and discuss this weekend. And then as you do that, you will eventually start to realize that growing up in this way is as natural as anything else. Meaning that you've probably heard me use this phrase before, but one of my more entertaining spiritual pastimes is listening to Alan Watts. I just think he knows he's a spiritual entertainer, and that's how he defined himself. And I find him very entertaining. And I also find him, sharing some interesting truths from time to time. Alan Watts, Alanwatts. And he also has a nice British accent, which for us Americans, that's also entertained by itself. But anyway, one of the things he was talking about is he was saying that as a person matures, that it's like when he was a child, and he would watch his uncle, with a long gray beard, smoking his pipe over in the corner, looking wise and old and sage-like. And if you have seen Alan Watts, you know that he eventually also had a long beard and smoked a pipe. And he said, eventually you reach your uncle's age at that time and you realize, yeah, there's really nothing to this. And the same thing occurs with spirituality. Those ideas, those concepts, those states of consciousness that right now you might be thinking are beyond you, or are amazing, or are earth-shattering, awe-inspiring. If you attend to these processes every day with seriousness and devotion, the years will go by and you'll have the experiences, and it's not going to be like your mind just melts and all of a sudden there's the wholeness of life. It occurs gradually and you're like, oh yeah, okay, there it is. Now, if you would have that realization right now, without having ever done meditation or thought these things through, then yes, it would seem like the most mind-boggling, awe-inspiring experience you have ever had. But that would be like taking a baby, a 3-year-old, and all of a sudden sticking that 3-year-old in a 21-year-old's body. Could you even actually handle that? No. What would a 3-year-old mentality do in a 21-year-old body? Well, you just have a 21-year-old acting like a baby. We're acting like a toddler. So again, this is why we want to approach it with this incremental attention, so that it becomes as natural as breathing, and the wisdom develops easy. And again, you want to see it as something easy and natural, because the more you put the Vedic seers up on a pedestal, the more you put these ideas of gurus and their knowledge up on a pedestal, the more distance you put between yourself and actually getting there, or actually realizing it. So we have to allow ourselves to grow up, essentially, right? We have to allow ourselves to grow up, essentially. We have to let go of the need to develop a hierarchical or tier-based nature with beings we consider to be spiritual. If a spiritual person or a sage is truly what they say they are just like a good parent. And what do good parents do? Does a good parent say, I want you to remain dependent upon me? Does a good parent say, I don't want you to know as much as I do? Or does the good parent encourage you to grow up, to take care of yourself, to be an adult, to attend to your own family from that point forward? That is what's required. And so if you find teachers or trainers or mentors that have that ideal for you, they don't want your money, they don't want your dependence, they don't want your worship, they want you to know what they know. Then you know that you probably have a healthy relationship there. So always keep that in mind. Okay, so anyway. So we'll take a quick little break here, and I'll go check the questions before we get back into our exploration for today. Okay, so we have a comment. Kriya Yoga means the union of the actions of the whole is one. Exactly. It's learning to realize that every activity, every moment, every thought, every breath is an expression of the whole. That's what it's about. So if you can have that possibility in your mind for you to realize that, you're starting on a good foundation. There's also a comment here about no onions and garlic, obviously due to my comments probably on the recommendations for this week. You know, there are basic things that are always recommended, such as eating a primarily vegetarian diet, not eating onions and garlic, not eating heavy, oily, fried foods, trying to eat healthy, natural foods, mostly fruits and vegetables. That's the generic recommendation for everyone and everything. Notice I said the generic recommendation. I say no onions and garlic because personally it doesn't work well for me. I also have done some research on it, talking to a neuroscientist, and onions and garlic actually interfere with the neurochemistry in the brain, which regulates states of consciousness. So it's not just a superstition. It's not just a generic statement. There's actually some sense to it. And even when jet planes were being built and first discovered and tested, it was actually recommended for test pilots to not eat onions and garlic for 3 to 4 days before they had to test a jet plane, because they found that it actually slowed down the reaction time. If you're going Mach 1, you need some pretty serious reaction time. And the same is true with meditation and spirituality. You need to be as alert and awake as possible. So that's why that recommendation is there. But be advised that, you know, I will talk about the general and generic things that you need to do. But at the end of the day, you need to figure it out for yourself, what works and what doesn't for you, right? It's not going to be the same for everybody. Okay, so more questions. So what were you looking to accomplish through Kriya Yoga? What was the end point destination in mind? That's a good question. There's a couple different ways I thought about it. You know, getting my undergraduate degree in philosophy and psychology, always having an interest in alternative religions and occult things such as astrology. My mind always wanted to kind of get to the what's behind it all. Like that's the way my mind would function. You know, if you thought a kid could drive their parents nuts asking why about everything, well, that didn't stop with me as a kid. That continued through high school and college and even beyond. So there was a lot of that inspiration, because it occurred to me that for some reason, that by following these processes, that I could get to the actual why. It could be very clear to me, what's this all about? So that was my real, probably driving thing. I was never really a devotional person in the sense of bhakti yoga, or, you know, getting all dressed up and saying namaste to everyone and bless you and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I got kicked out of Sunday school, I don't know how many times, but that's Catholic Sunday school. But that wasn't because I was being disruptive. It was because they were talking about the Bible and I was asking questions. Well, that doesn't make sense, but why? And finally they said, get out. So, you know, I've always had more of a, what's the word? Maybe jnana yoga approach, questioning approach. I was devoted in that way. And my idea wasn't to unite with anything in a sense. It was more to realize what's going on here. Because in my mind, I figured that if I knew what was going on here, then I wouldn't have the question of, do I need to unite with something? I also got involved in meditation and so on because as a child, early adult, I wasn't a very happy individual. Anxious, tendency towards depression, anger issues, you know, things of this nature. And it was just because that was life as a teenager in the area I grew up in. But I knew that there was more to it. I knew that it didn't have to be that way. And so I just needed to develop skills to kind of deal with those things. So there was also that tamasic approach of really wanting to, in a sense, better myself, or not be at the mercy of things like depression or anxiety or anger. And, you know, as time went by, again, just to clarify, I'm not saying that you ignore depression. I'm not saying you try to escape from depression. I'm saying that's a natural part of life. And I've learned that. Just like being anxious or fearful about something, that's part of being in this world. So you play the part. Doesn't mean you get overcome by it. And that's what you learn as you proceed through your meditation and Kriya practices. You learn to be here as a human while remaining aware of what you actually really are, right? It's like you learn to be the actor inside while playing the role on the outside. So don't mistake the comments I just made, saying that you have to overcome things like anger and anxiety and depression. Those will just be natural things that occur. The only thing you have to actually overcome is your attachment to them. You're defining yourself by them. And then life becomes much more easy. So in a sense, that was probably the most basic, clearest, direct reasons why I got involved in the practice. But, you know, the more I think about it, I don't know if I actually could have helped it because it just happened so naturally. I just became interested in it. Next thing I know, I went on retreats and a few years later, I started scratching my head and thinking to myself, you know, I wanted to be a musician. So now I'm able to, you know, play guitar and mandolin as hobbies, which is fine. And, you know, attend to these kinds of processes, which takes up more of my time than anything else, really. All right, so moving on. Okay, yeah, Joe Goldstein. So the concept as a self is like the constellation of the stars. It's just a concept, and when you get rid of the concept constellation, the stars are still there. But the belief in illusionary self is gone. Yeah, that's pretty good. Not a question, but a nice comment there. I'll reread it just because it speaks to also the idea of astrology. And, you know, I like that too. Joseph Goldstein says the concept as a self is like the constellations, or those patterns we see in the sky. The constellation of the stars. It's just a concept. And when you get rid of the concept of constellations, the stars are still there, but the belief in the illusion that they're making a pattern is gone. So in the same way, the illusory self is also gone. So that's very good. Okay, so good question here. Let's see. How did you discover Ramana Maharshi's teaching of self-inquiry and Kriya Yoga intertwine? Do you have any recommendations for reading Ramana Maharshi? Yeah, that's easy. Well, whenever I would go to on retreat, one of the practices that we did at the end of our meditation was asking the question, what am I? Which we're going to get into during this particular stay-at-home retreat for you. And then my teacher would speak about Ramana Maharshi. I was like, okay, well, that sounds interesting. So I happened to go up into the library and found some books on him. It was Talks with Ramana Maharshi. That's a good book. So if you're going to find a book, the one I love most is Talks with Ramana Maharshi. I believe that's what it's called. It's a pretty big book. And I started reading it, and my mind just became more and more engaged in that whole process because, again, it just spoke to the way this worked. Because it got to the point of, well, what am I? What is this all about? And even in the Yoga Sutras, which is specific to Kriya Yoga practice. And why is that? Well, because there's actually, we're going to talk about this weekend, but there's actually a chapter in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali called Kriya Yoga. Okay? And if you read the Yoga Sutras, in the very beginning, what does it say? Well, I think it's the first four sutras. It talks about that yoga is the process of ending the fluctuations and changes in the field of consciousness. It's number one. Or that's number two, actually, but the first one is simply now instruction in yoga. So number two, yoga is the process of ending fluctuations and changes in the field of consciousness. And what that takes you to is the ending of concepts and conceptualization. And if you're not conceptualizing, oh, look, there's the vacuum cleaner. Oh, look, I'm right here. Well, there's no division at all. It's just consciousness. And the third sutra is then the seer, and you know what the seer is. Right now you are seeing the screen. You are seeing my voice by hearing it. You are perceiving what's going on around you. You are the seer. Then the seer abides in the seer's own true nature. Simple as that. If you can end the fluctuations in consciousness, if you can end your conceptualization, and sometimes you might have to look up these words. Like when I was exploring this type of thing, I thought I knew what conceptualization meant or objectification meant or being the subject. And finally I thought, well, let's get out a dictionary and look these things up. And it helped me understand quite a little bit more. But if you end the fluctuations in consciousness and you end the compartmentalization of this is that, I am this, I'm not this, and so on, if you can stop that, then you abide in your own true nature. And it's as simple as that, which is exactly what Ramana Maharshi's approach, vichara, self-inquiry, is all about. And in the Yoga Sutras, it then goes on to say that if you are not abiding in your own true nature as the seer without conceptualization, then it goes on to say, then there is conformity to definitions. Then there's conformity to definitions. Then you are defining yourself. In the same way that if you have a blank piece of paper, and it's just a blank piece of paper, there it is. And now you draw a square on it. Well, what have you done? You've just defined space on the piece of paper. Is it any different than the piece of paper? No, it's still the piece of paper. Now there's just a line around a certain section of it. So this is a little bit heady, I think, for our first lecture. But at the end of it all, it's all going to come back to those first 4 or 5 sutras in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Everything we do is simply to be able to exist free of concepts. And I see there's another message here. I'll go look at that in a moment. But one thing, okay, so it's not a question, but one thing that can be very helpful for you in meditation is to think about holding your mental breath. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's going to give you an insight into existing free of concepts. When you're having a conversation with someone and they're saying something that you want to speak to, like you want to respond to what they're trying to share with you. Like they're talking and you've got an idea and you really want to get it out, but you can't because the time's not right. Well, at that moment, what you are doing is you are holding, in a sense, holding your breath, holding your words in. And so there's silence there on your part as you are listening. Well, you have to start thinking about your mind the same way. What's going on in your mind all the time? And this can be really benefited by taking a day to have a day of silence. This is very, very informative and telling about your nature. I remember when I first started doing it, I believe I would do it on Sundays. And the first few times I did this, I decided the whole day, I'm not saying a word, not talking. I did have a piece of paper in case I needed to write something like, what do you want for lunch? I want a grilled cheese sandwich or whatever it might be. So I did have something to communicate in that regard with. But I would just not talk. And when you don't talk, you start to see your mind and realize how your mind is responding to everything that goes on around you, whether you're going to say something about it or not. So it's almost like there's a thing up in your head that just feels like it has to comment on everything. And when you take a day of silence and someone's having a conversation or talking, you realize how much you want to interject yourself and your opinion, the things that your mind's coming up with, but you can't because you've got a day of silence. And about halfway through that day, you quit because you can't say anything anyway because you're being silent. So you start to realize that it's dumb to sit there and have the ideas going over and over in your mind if you're not going to say anything about it. So the same thing can be utilized in meditation, which takes some practice, but it is a little bit of a hint and insight that you can use. If you can sit there quietly and be aware of the mind and it's chatting and act like, in a sense, you are holding your mental breath where you're just deciding, I'm not going to comment on that. Just keeping your mouth shut inside. It's a weird way to think of it, but just imagine you keeping your mouth shut inside. Eventually, the mind quits because it realizes you're not responding to it. You're not responding to the incessant chatter. So anyway, point being, I don't know how we got on that little tangent. Right. Because when you do that, you are not defining things. You're not saying, this is good, this is bad, I want to talk about this, I need to assert my opinion about that, they need to hear me about this. All you are doing is simply being awake, observing, watching. There's no conformity to definitions. Then you are abiding as the self. Then you are abiding as the self. And that's a good first step. Does it mean that as soon as you abide as the self, lights come down out of heaven and you realize, the words of all the masters? No. But you have to start there, because once you can abide in that way, and once all this clutter and this mental debris slowly disintegrates in a way, then you are preparing yourself to perceive what has always been true about how it's all one thing. And again, there's no way I'm going to explain that in such a way that I think it'll make as much sense to you as you want, because even as I was learning these things, and I would read books about people and their descriptions of experiencing a oneness consciousness, or I would hear people talk about descriptions of it. When you actually experience it, it's usually nothing like what you made up in your head. Okay, so on some level, we do have to have a type of faith to pursue and test what we learn. and to continue in that fashion until we see it for ourselves, until you see the beauty of nature in front of you, instead of someone just talking to you about it. So that's what we're moving towards. So Stephanie brings up a astrological point. She says, silence is suicide for a Mercury Atmakaraka. Now, we're not going to get into astrology, but some planets are said to be closer to our nature. I mean, like some people have more Saturnine nature. Some people have more mercurial nature. And I'm ruled over by Mercury, so I understand that comment. But the thing is that Mercury is not meant to always be thinking about things. And that's, oftentimes the way we consider Mercury to be always about communicating ideas. Mercury can actually perceive this wholeness, which is why Mercury, the idea of Mercury, and even the idea of astrology is said to be a Vishnu path. Because Vishnu is everything. Vishnu is this microphone, Vishnu is this fern, Vishnu is this orange sweater, Vishnu is the words that I'm speaking, Vishnu is you listening. And just imagine if you could really right now be totally aware of the fact that that is true. You wouldn't have to think about anything. So, it can be suicide for a Mercury Atmakaraka, but actually it's more life-giving than you might think. So anyway, this is my attempt to have conversations with you about these questions that you have. So let's go ahead and continue on with our thoughts on Kriya Yoga before we do a meditation process to conclude this particular session. Let me find my notes here. Okay, here we are. Now, as I mentioned, there are different ways and different methods to approach your own particular path. As you're learning from me and about me, or at least this little personality, is that the devotional side of things, in the way that Yogananda was devotional, is you're not going to get that. Just like Yogananda did not get necessarily as naturally that disciplined approach that his mentor Sri Yukteswar had. So we're going to approach these things differently based on our own unique nature. And we have to realize that we need to be conscious and aware of what responds well for us. Meaning that if you take me to a kirtan and you say, chant the name of Krishna hundreds of thousands of times to this music, you will have an awakened experience. Well, that may be true, but it's unlikely for someone like me, because I don't respond well. When I listen to music, I want to listen to music I like. I don't really care so much for devotional music. It's interesting. Sure, I can play it a little bit. But for me, I get more devotional about listening to things like the blues and rock and roll and jazz and Celtic music. I can get lost in that in the same way that people who like kirtan can get lost in devotional music. It's a similar kind of getting lost. In the same way that if I took that individual who likes kirtan and devotional and bhakti, and I said, no. What you need to do is you need to come sit down with me for 3 hours, be completely silent, do a few pranayama exercises, and then just sit there and hold your mental breath for as long as possible. For me to tell someone who's more devotional that's silly, because it's not going to work that way. But at the end of the day, what we find is that devotion, like bhakti, and jnana, or knowledge-based practices, are what I like to call, and what in Vasista's yoga, two wings of the same bird. You need them both. You have to have the devotion and focus in your jnana yoga, your inquiry, that you would have if you were practicing bhakti or devotional practices. In the same way, you have to learn to remain alert and not get lost in fantasy or drama in your bhakti or devotional practice, that you have to use that same kind of principle that you would in a jnana or more knowledge-based practice. So they go together. They go together. Jnana and bhakti, devotion in the way we typically think of it, and knowledge, they result in the same thing, and they have to overlap. You have to kind of tap into the same process. But for you, you have to figure out for yourself what works best. Meaning that as we go through our practices together, you might realize that it works very well for you to chant a mantra to a particular melody so that you can calm down your mind, so that you can calm down your nervous system, so that you can then sit there quietly in a reflective state. And you may find that in your jnana yoga or vichara or contemplative practice that you have to learn to hold yourself awake and devoted to your point of contemplation until you have realization. But only you can determine how's that going to work for you. And so we have to make this a balanced approach. When I'm feeling like I need to be motivated and really get more into it, I have a shruti box, which is like the drones from drones from a harmonium. And so if I need to sit there for 20 or 30 minutes and crank on that shruti box, droning away a C while I chant Om Namah Shivaya, that's what I have to do. And then I go into my normal meditative practice. If you don't have to do that, that's perfectly fine. You can go right into a very basic meditation practice. So with what we discussed this weekend, you are certainly going to have to find your own way, and there's nothing wrong with that because you just respond differently. Some people meditate better at night. Some people meditate better in the morning. Some people meditate better before they exercise. Some people meditate better after they exercise. There's all these things you have to discover. Some people need to meditate on an empty stomach. Some people can eat a full meal and still meditate fine. So part of this whole process of Kriya Yoga and self-knowledge, self-realization, isn't only realization of the wholeness of everything, which is also yourself. It's also paying attention to how your little body and personality, this little facet of the much bigger picture, functions. Learning to take good self-inventory and respond to that. So anyway, the whole point I'm trying to get at is that you need to pay attention to what works well for you. That doesn't mean that you don't do things that are recommended because you say, oh, that doesn't work well for me. Some people can say, oh, I can't meditate. Well, I couldn't play the banjo until I spent a couple years trying. So there are different parts of the whole process that are required that you just simply have to develop. And there are other parts that you learn to adapt and adjust to your own unique mind-body constitution. And that takes time for you to figure it out. And ultimately, here is the mechanism behind the whole process. No matter what you do, the mechanism behind the whole process. You are training yourself to be aware, and you are training yourself to focus on that which you want to know. And you are training yourself to hold your attention on and in a sense, what you want to know. And that is why you can't skip the practice of meditation. Because if you skip it, you are not training yourself to focus on what it is you want to experience. And at the end of the day, what you're going to find is that those saints and those sages that know peace, they know peace because they've learned to hold their attention and their state of consciousness on peace. Those saints and sages and yogis and whatnot who describe their perceptions of divinity, this whole infinite consciousness, it's because through training, they have learned to hold their attention on that state, that realization. And that works with anything. If you want to know love, you have to learn to hold your awareness on that state. And that's what it comes down to. And that's why people have such problems in the world, because in a sense, their mind is fragmented. Their capacity to hold their attention on what they want to know or be is weak. So someone comes along, does something to them, they get angry. Someone comes along, does something to them, they get happy. Someone comes along, does something to them, they get sad. They're at the mercy of all these perceived external influences. And the sage, the saint, the self-realized person is not at the mercy of any external influence. Why is that? Because they've learned through time and attention, dedication, to hold their awareness on their heart. And I don't mean their physical beating heart, although maybe you're going to use that as a focus, but on the source of self. It's hard to use words when you're trying to describe something that doesn't really work with words, but I think you get the point. And the question comes up, do you have to meditate your way to enlightenment or self-realization? Can't you just self-inquire your way to it like jnana yoga? Well, that's meditation, right? So maybe we need to be very clear on what meditation is. Meditation is certainly your natural state. So most people say meditation is do this breath awareness, do this mantra, do that. That's a technique. That's not meditation. That is a technique. You do those techniques to strengthen your capacity to focus. And when it comes to the idea of self-inquiry, well, when you're practicing self-inquiry, you're consistently redirecting your attention back to the question, who or what am I? And that's a meditation technique. So that's just meditation too. So no matter what you do, which is learning to bring your awareness back and hold it right here, wherever that here is for you, whatever that point of focus is, that is the technique in a sense that reveals to you that natural state of meditation. It's just that we often confuse meditation, like, oh, I'm doing transcendental meditation, which means I'm doing a mantra, or I'm doing Kriya yoga meditation, which means I am circulating life force through the spine through a typical kind of pranayama. To be more authentic, we would say, I'm doing this technique. Because whether you use transcendental meditation, mantra, whether you use pranayama, whether you use self-inquiry, the mechanism is the same. You're bringing your attention back to the mantra, transcendental meditation. You're bringing your attention back to the pranayama, Kriya yoga. You're bringing your attention back to the question, who am I? So you see, the object, the perceived object is different, mantra, pranayama, question, but the process is the same. So the process is always the same. Does this make sense? And if not, share with me how I can make it clearer. And again, yes, those of you who've participated with me before, you know how I function, but if not, basically, I like to make sure people are listening and involved. So when I say, does this make sense? Even if you think it's so simple, just type yes in the group chat so I know you're there. Great. Okay, perfect. So again, what you're realizing is the mechanism behind this thing that we maybe somewhat inefficiently call meditation. The mechanism is the same no matter what you choose to focus on as a technique. Some people say, well, isn't then rock climbing like meditation? Or isn't whitewater kayaking like meditation? They say, this is where I really get in the zone. Well, you got to ask yourself, why are you getting in the zone in that situation? Is it because you are choosing to stop your mind or to focus on something? Or is it because your adrenaline and your hormones, and you're in a situation where you could die, are forcing you into the present moment? So this isn't about doing things that force you into the present moment, because if you're not in the present moment, you're going to die. This is about consciously cultivating that, right? That is the difference. That is the difference between the thrill seeker and what we're going to term the yogi. The yogi is consciously cultivating that in every moment. Not because they're about to die, not because if they're not so focused that something's going to go wrong, but simply because it is their choice. So in a sense, you can turn anything into a meditation technique if you do it right and well. If you're just always bringing your attention back. If I want, and I do this a lot, I can turn playing music into a meditation technique. I can decide that all I'm doing is focusing on the sound. All I'm doing is focusing on the scale. And the moment of distraction where a thought comes in, no, I bring it right back. And so ideally, this is the ideal. You don't want just the time that you're using a sanctioned yogic meditation technique to be your process. You want it such that as you pick up your teacup and have a sip, that you are focused on the teacup and the taste, that you're not worried about I'm not worried about what I'm going to say next. Or when you're reading a book, you're actually reading the book. You're not just skimming through it and then 4 chapters later you think to yourself, was I even paying attention? When you're having a conversation with someone, when you're gardening, when you're doing your work, when you're doing things you don't want to do, whatever it is. One of the things I enjoy doing is when my friends get sick, I like making them chicken soup. I have a great chicken soup recipe. It's got all kinds of fancy ingredients and it tastes really good. And so, my friends joke, they say the best thing about getting sick is my chicken soup. So I treat that process that when I know a friend's getting sick, I go to the store, I buy all the ingredients that I need, I come home, I make sure that as I'm going through each step of boiling the chicken, of chopping up the vegetables, of figuring out the exact ingredients I want to use, of crushing the garlic, because garlic is a good medicinal thing, by the way. But of doing all these things, that I am attending to each thing as it happens. And if I'm not, I take a step back, I wait until I can bring myself more fully back to it again. So, no, you can't get the soup formula. The secret is lemon juice and smoked paprika. But anyway, yes, it's guaranteed to cure a cold within 3 to 10 days. So the question comes up, isn't that mindfulness meditation? Yes, it's mindfulness meditation. And again, that's really what I'm trying to get at here, is that all these techniques, all these principles, they're using the same mechanism. Doing things like pranayama and mantra are very good at quickly learning to train your brain and your consciousness and your nervous system to stay focused. It's like you take an iron stake and you drill it into the ground and you tie your mind to it. That's what a pranayama or mantra technique does. You can't go out of the bounds of that. And so that is, in a sense, training yourself to hold that state of clarity. Training yourself to hold that state of clarity. And then after that, you're more likely to be successful in things like mindfulness meditation, because once you go through the technique, all you are doing is sitting there in mindfulness. And by mindfulness, I mean observing, participating, not compartmentalizing anything. And in time that gets deeper, but most of us, and Even people who are interested in mindfulness meditation specifically, they can benefit by actually using a technique. It's just like jump starting your engine, or when the battery's dead, like jump starting the batteries. Most people, when they get involved in mindfulness meditation, they don't have actual proper yogic training. And so they're going out there and trying to start their car when the battery's dead. And they say, yes, I'm getting somewhere, because essentially all they're really doing is resting. And that's great. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. More people need rest. But by simply sitting there and resting, you're not getting the higher benefits of abiding as the self, typically. And this is kind of a touchy subject to talk about and sort of hard to explain. But by going through mantra, by going through meditation techniques, that's like an intensive process that says, all right, wake up, relax, observe. And that's why in Kriya Yoga Vichara, the advanced meditation procedures, essentially all they are is going through each meditation technique and sitting in the silence for as long as possible. And then when you need to use another technique, you can start over. You can do a different technique, because all those are doing is re-engaging your attention so that you can return to being awake and relaxed and participating in the silence. Now, one final thing I want to say before we go into this meditation. Is that what you're going to do as you move through this process, probably one of the most ultimate realizations you're going to have, is that, number one, you actually are and always have been everything in some way, shape, form, or fashion throughout all time. And then once you have that realization, what typically comes upon you is that you are eternal. And then you have to figure out, well, since I'm an eternal being, how am I going to live this eternal life? So this idea of surrender and will comes into play. Because yes, you have to participate as this limited personality. But once you have the realization that the limited personality is only one little fragment of what you actually really are, then the question arises, again, how do I actually want to live my life? Which means you have to take responsibility for the thoughts in your head, for the way you react to things, for the places you live, for the directions you go. And this becomes scary and difficult, because at that point, you can't be told what to do by religious experts. You can't be told what to do by family or friends. And it's not that you are going out there and saying, I am doing, by God, whatever I want. It's just that you realize that at the end of the day, everything is the result of your own intentions. And that when you are spiritually younger, yes, you have to follow spiritual religious guidelines to keep you in line. But once you become an adult, a responsible spiritual adult, you then accept and understand that ultimately only you are responsible for your states of consciousness. Now, we don't really need to get too much into this right now, but I wanted to share it because you are going to have this as a recording to reflect back on. And as the years go by, if that realization starts to pop into your head, don't discourage it. Think about it. It's going to take a while to make peace with it. But maybe you'll remember this talk or this lecture, and then you'll start to begin the real work of asking yourself, all right, as a responsible spiritual adult, how do I want to participate in this creation? And don't jump ahead. Don't go there if you're not quite there yet. And you'll know when you are, because it'll be like a little nagging in the back of your mind. It's like calling you to a greater sense of responsibility. But it's not like a heavy responsibility, like, oh God, you know, I'm responsible for everything and everyone in the world. If you think that, well, that's still a bit of ego. It's more just simply the realization that I'm adult and I can live my life the way an adult can, you know, the way a healthy adult can. There's nothing wrong with that. So I just wanted to share that for you to consider and think about. Okay. Okay, so one final question before we do our meditation. And these meditations that we do are going to be, well, of course, they're going to be experiential, but they're going to be learning by doing. But this question here is the technique needed for building momentum to get insight? Yes, that's a very good point. The techniques we've discussed are needed to get insight. Because if your mind is fragmented and you're thinking this and doing that and confused about that and you're scattered over here and you have no idea what you are and it's just, everything's going everywhere, you can't have a clear conversation with yourself. Because it's like trying to have a conversation with someone at a loud rock and roll concert, or trying to listen to the radio when you've got 3 different stations coming in. You can't quite hear one of them. There's just too much static, too much confusion. But when you learn to exist quietly, and there's not a lot of external things pulling your attention away, that has generated the capacity to then gain insight. So that is truly why we do use these meditation techniques, because they allow us to, in a sense, put our attention in a direction and hold it there. So if I want to know what God is, in order for me to know what that is, I have to keep redirecting my attention back to that. You know, I might get sidetracked thinking about this or the past or whatever it might be. But if I can keep bringing it back, eventually I'll hit a stride where that's all I'm focused on, is this wondering, well, what does it mean? Who is this idea of God? Where did it come from? Until eventually I have that aha moment. If I want to know what it means to know love, I have to be able to focus on that throughout the minutes, the hours, the days, the weeks, the months, the years, whatever it takes, until I hit that stride to be able to focus specifically on that. So you use these meditation techniques so that you are training yourself to hold your awareness on a point. So that way, when it's time to contemplate and learn what you really want to know, you can. You've got the skills. You know, it's like, why do athletes go work out? Why do they lift weights? Why do they run? They don't do it so that they can keep lifting weights and keep running. They do it so that they can actually go do their sport. So the techniques, the mantra, the pranayama, the questioning, that's like the athlete exercising. And then when you're able to sit there quietly and contemplate, what is my relationship with this wholeness of life? What is it that this spiritual text is really trying to share with me? Then you can have the insight because you've trained yourself to focus on it. So we need to look at technique not as an end to itself, but in the same way that an athlete exercises so that the athlete can actually do their sport, right? Okay. So any final questions before we do our little 20-minute meditation to conclude this section? And if there are no questions, please type no in the box. If there are, just type yes, and then I'll wait for you to type out more of the question. Okay, great. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to be learning through doing. Learning through doing. And since you'll have a recording of this whole series, go back and re-listen to these things. You know, everyone likes people to keep saying the same things over and over. And for me, that's the beauty of these videos on YouTube, is you don't have to keep saying things over and over. You say it once, people can go back and rewatch things. So there are numerous meditation sessions on YouTube channel where we go through a particular procedure. And those procedures are procedures that I use every single day, exactly the same, very little deviation. So I don't put up a lot of different meditations because I would just be doing the same thing with a different shirt on. So do be sure to explore those meditation sessions on YouTube youtube.com/Kriya Yoga Online to get more experienced insights, but also use this video repeatedly, figuring out, all right, what is the simple approach that we're doing here? And how can I learn to practice that by myself? It may be that you use this talk in this video many, many times, but eventually you need to kind of take away the training wheels and just incorporate what you learn on your own. And it may be that you keep going back to the video, back and forth until you get it, in the same way that when you learn a song or you're doing a recipe, you're trying to memorize it, but you kind of need to go back to the recipe every now and then to remind yourself until eventually it becomes second nature. So that's what we're doing. And that's what these lectures and talks are all about here. So to begin, take a moment to sit up straight. Take a nice deep breath in. Exhale, be aware of the body and let the body relax. And as you do this, be aware of the body. You don't have to close your eyes yet. Just be aware of the body, how it feels, whether good or bad, doesn't matter, just feel it. Be aware of what you perceive in the environment. You're just noticing what's around you. So you're becoming mindful, conscious, and aware of consciousness as it is, perfect in whatever way right now. And then take a nice, easy, deep breath in again. Exhale, relax, and close your eyes. Now, with your eyes closed, breathe. And watch the breath, watch the body. And when I say that, I just simply mean to feel it. How does it feel to breathe? How does it feel to perceive your body right now? And now feel as though you are pulling your attention within. So you've looked around, you've been aware of how your body feels. Now have the sense, in whichever way works for you, as though you are pulling your attention into your core. Just like when you go to sleep at night and you withdraw your attention from the outside world. Well, as you close your eyes and sit up straight, you're withdrawing your attention internally. Now, with this internal awareness, affirm to yourself that you are, and you know on some level, that you are the wholeness of life. That your body, your mind, your personality is simply a condensation, a facet of this vast, infinite intelligence. Either say it to yourself or feel it. It's best if you can imagine what that would feel like. You know, bring up that imagination, even if it's weak at first. In time, the more you do this, the more natural it becomes. But affirm this. in your core. And affirm that because of this state, this truth, that because it is your intention to know it, to be it, to realize yourself, that you are supported in this process. It may not necessarily always be easy, but you know that you are supported in this process. And affirm that any perceived obstacles is just simply another realization of what you need to resolve within yourself. So there actually are no obstacles in this procedure, just realizations and deeper realizations. Now, holding this sense within your core, within your heart, that you are, as much as the wholeness of life as anything else, that you are actually truly supported in this process, in this endeavor. Take another easy, deep breath. Exhale and relax. And we're going to practice a mantra. The mantra is so, S-O, so, hum, H-U-M. So you want to let the breath be natural and easy. You're not forcing it, you're just letting it come in and out. On the inhalation, you are mentally hearing the word so within your mind, within your consciousness. On the exhalation, you are mentally hearing the syllable hum. So inhale so, exhale hum. Remember that the mechanism behind this, the process, is that you are learning to redirect your attention to the technique, to the mantra. It's perfectly normal for you to have thoughts, for you to be distracted. It's perfectly normal. But your goal is to, when you notice that you are distracted, to just gently, without judgment, return your awareness to the breath, listening to the syllables so on the inhale and hum on the exhale, as though the breath and the mantra are like ocean waves coming in to the beach and rolling out, cleansing the beach, cleansing your consciousness with each inhalation and exhalation. Until all you're aware of is the purity of your consciousness and catching glimpses Usually in the beginning, it's just glimpses of that silence, of that non-judgmental, pure awareness. So continue with the mantra. So on the inhale, hum on the exhale. Make sure you're comfortable, yet sitting up straight. And as you continue with the mantra, let the body and the mind relax just a little bit more. Oftentimes we can do this by consciously imagining what it would feel like if we didn't have a whole lot of worries. We didn't really need to be bothered by anything at this point in time. Everything's being taken care of right now. So in that way, sitting up straight, consciously let the body and mind relax a little bit more. And take the mantra a little bit deeper. So on the inhale, hum on the exhale. And now take a moment to direct your attention from what you perceive your core to be up to the space between your eyebrows. So the center of the forehead, essentially, the space between the eyebrows. Sit there breathing naturally and normally, and let go of the mantra. Let the mantra fall away. Just observe and watch, sitting quietly, alert yet relaxed, holding your awareness, the space between your eyebrows, the frontal portions of the brain. And as you do this, you don't have to do really anything other than that. So if thoughts, memories, emotions arise, it's not a big deal. It's just something happening. So you're just going to watch it, whatever that might be. The only thing you have to do is sit up straight, let the body relax, hold the attention, the space between the eyebrows, and just observe whatever is going on within your consciousness right now. And if you catch yourself getting caught up in thoughts and memories or feelings and emotions during the simple procedure of observing, that's okay. All you got to do is just attempt to the best of your ability to pull back into that observational role. You're not suppressing anything. You're just moving from being caught up in what you were perceiving to being centered at the space between the eyebrows, the frontal portions of the brain, as the observer again. So let's just do this a little bit longer, letting the breath be natural and easy. And now to finish up and balance this meditation time together, what we want to do is imagine that there is a tube within our spine from the top of our skull, the very top, the crown of our head, all the way down to the base of our spine. Just imagine there's a small hollow tube there. And now as you breathe, just gently and easily, you want to imagine what would it feel like if you had a cool, soothing flow of water or energy ascending up through the spine on the inhale. And on the exhale, a warm, soothing sensation, relaxing and comforting, flowing back down the spine from the top of the head all the way back down through the spine. What would that feel like? We'll continue breathing in this way. Maybe the breath slightly slower than usual. Inhaling, imagining, what would it feel like to have a cool, soothing sensation ascending up through the spine, from the base of the spine all the way up to the very crown of the head? And then what would it feel like to have a warm, soothing, comforting energy ascending down through the center of the spine, drawing you inward, keeping you internalized and relaxed and clear. And let this be the focus of your technique, calming your consciousness and clarifying your awareness. And right now the eyes are just closed. You're not doing anything in particular with them, as has been for the duration of this meditation. Gently closed eyes. And now even let that go. You can take one more easy breath, feeling that cool sensation ascending up through the spine to the crown of the head. And just let the breath be natural, breathing easily, not focusing on any particular technique, just observing your current state of consciousness. When you're ready, take a breath in, exhale and open your eyes. Be aware of your surroundings and how you feel. And this will conclude our time together during this first session. Take some time in personal reflection between now and our next session. If you do have questions that came up, write them down and bring them when we meet up during our next session. And we'll speak to them then. Okay. So take it easy, and we'll see you in about 4 hours, it looks like. So get some rest or go for a little walk if you want. Think about what we've discussed. Bring your questions back, and we'll review more detailed techniques and also have a question and answer session, and then practice meditation again this evening. So be well. Thank you.